Storytime Square! Let's leap into adventure!
The Kit Kat Caper, written by Susan Ross, illustrated by Megan Stiver. Rachel's mother was tapping her toe. She was waiting for 5-year-old Rachel and Daddy to go trick-or-treating. Stella, the family's calico cat, was twining about her legs and purring. Petrie, the parrot, was bobbing on her shoulder. Rachel was dressed as Little Bo Peep. Her small, fluffy, white dog Sophie was her sheep. Rachel was so excited about trick-or-treating with Daddy that she was jumping up and down, eager to fill her empty plastic pumpkin. Mommy was staying home to hand out the candy. Rachel's mother hustled Rachel, Daddy, and Sophie out the door and quickly closed it behind them. Shortly after they left, the lights in their home went out one by one. A short figure exited the dark house. She had long black hair and was wearing a tall, pointed black hat and a flowing black dress that dragged along the ground behind her. In one hand was a broomstick, in the other a hollow goblin head that glowed in the dark. A black cat trailed after her, and a large black bat roosted on the rim of her hat. The little witch knocked on the neighbor's door. She heard the thump, thump, thump of Mrs. Grizzle's cane as the old lady hobbled down the hallway. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Grizzle stood hunched in the doorway. The little witch chanted, "Trick or treat, chocolate is sweet. I need some to eat right now." "Right now, eh? That's not very polite," complained Mrs. Grizzle. She put on her glasses to get a good look at the bat, the cat, and her impolite guest in the tall black hat. You don't look very familiar to me. Do I know you?" "Oh, no, you don't know me. I just moved into the neighborhood," replied the little witch, holding out her goblin head. Mrs. Grizzle grudgingly dropped in some gummy bears. "Candies?" cried the disappointed little witch, taking them out of her goblin head. "I don't want candies. Don't you have any Kit Kats?" "Why, no, I don't, you rude little girl," snapped an angry Mrs. Grizzle, and she slammed the door right in the little witch's face. Mrs. Grizzle was so mad that she turned off her front lights and refused to open her door to any more trick-or-treaters. The cat coughed up a hairball on her doorstep. Grumbled the little witch as she stomped down the sidewalk. She knocked on the next door. It was flung open by a giant of a man who loomed in the doorway. A huge German shepherd stuck its massive head out the door. The black cat's hair rose on its arched back. "Ah, witch!" shrieked Officer Johnson in mock horror. The little witch didn't bat an eye. She didn't giggle. She stood there stone-faced and chanted, "Trick or treat, chocolate is sweet. I need some to eat right now." Officer Johnson didn't bat an eye. He didn't giggle. He stood there stone-faced as he patted Scout. Then he knelt down to get a better look at the bat, the cat, and the child in the tall black hat. You look very familiar to me. Do I know you?" "Oh, no, you don't know me. I just moved into the neighborhood," replied the little witch, holding out her goblin head. Officer Johnson dropped in a bag of peanuts. "Peanuts?" wailed the disgruntled little witch, taking them out of her goblin head. The bat snatched them out of her hand. "I'm allergic to peanuts. Don't you have any Kit Kats?" "No, I'm sorry I don't," replied Officer Johnson apologetically. "I'll have some for you next year, though, I promise." Muttered the little witch as she tromped to the next house. She rang the doorbell. Mrs. Buckner answered the door dressed as the Tooth Fairy. She loved Halloween almost as much as the children. The little witch chanted, "Trick or treat, chocolate is sweet. I need some to eat right now." Mrs. Buckner laughed. "I see you've brought some scary little friends with you." She bent down to get a closer look at the bat, the cat, and the youngster in the tall black hat. You look very familiar to me. Do I know you?" "Oh, no, you don't know me. I just moved into the neighborhood," replied the little witch, holding out her goblin head. "Mrs. Buckner dropped in too." "Kit Kats!" The little witch was thrilled. She cheered, "Kit Kats! Thank you, thank you, thank you!" as the bat bobbed on the rim of her tall black hat, and the cat twined around Mrs. Buckner's legs and purred. Then the little witch threw herself into Mrs. Buckner's arms and gave her a big hug. "You're very welcome," replied a startled Mrs. Buckner. She'd almost been knocked off her feet. "You're such a polite little girl." Every time the little witch got Kit Kats, she cheered, "Kit Kats! Thank you, thank you, thank you!" Every time she got a different treat, she'd whine, "Don't you have any Kit Kats?" The little witch continued to trick or treat all the way down the street. It was a very long street. Her knees were getting sore. The little witch had collected dozens of Kit Kats when she noticed Rachel, Daddy, and Sophie on their way home. "Uh-oh," whispered the little witch, and she dashed back towards Rachel's darkened house. The bat was clinging to her tall, pointed black hat, and the cat was racing beside her. Rachel, Daddy, and Sophie would be home any minute, so the little witch started leaping over the neighbors' fences. If anyone had been watching, they would have noticed that the little witch didn't seem so little anymore. Seconds later, the bat, the cat, and the person in the tall black hat sped through the back door. Not a single Kit Kat had dropped out of the goblin head. By the time Rachel, Daddy, and Sophie arrived home, all the lights in the house were on. Mommy was sitting in her chair by the candy bowl. "We had a great time!" Rachel exclaimed, smiling and yawning at the same time. Her pumpkin was overflowing with goodies. Rachel noticed the full bowl of candy beside Mommy. There had been lots of children out trick-or-treating. Why wasn't all the candy gone? Rachel looked at her mother with a puzzled expression on her face. Her mother just gave her a lopsided, chocolatey grin and asked, "Did you get any Kit Kats, dear?" Spiders. Spiders had been busy. They worked all through the night, spinning webs all over town for Halloween tonight. Cobwebs in the corners, cobwebs in our hair. Those creepy, crawly spiders wove cobwebs everywhere. Make a funny spider with fuzzy legs and hair, show it off to everyone, and give them all a scare. By Susan Ross. Storytime Square would like to say a special thank you to author Susan Ross for sending us this copy of her wonderful book. It certainly is a Halloween treat. The link to the author's website is in the description box below. Please check it out to view more of her works. We loved sharing this story of the Kit Kat Caper with our royal readers.